So not too long ago, I made a video about how and why I make my own Mogami cables at home instead of buying them at a retail store at an insane markup. And in that video specifically, I showed you guys how to make a TRS cable, and by popular demand and from all the comments that I saw, a lot of you requested that I make the same video but showing how to make an XLR microphone cable, which is exactly the point of this video today. I'm not going to cover the backstory of why I make my own cables or the cost breakdown, but I did leave a link to the other video in the description below, so you can go ahead and check that out on why I make my own cables, the difference in cost between making your own or buying them from the store, some of the advantages and disadvantages of making your own cables. So click the link in the description and check that out. But for now, let's get into the details and the parts and the tools that I use to make XLR cables. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be actually going through making of the cable in real time. A lot of other tutorials on YouTube I've seen kind of skip some of the important steps and some of the steps that I've encountered issues with. So when I make the cable in this video, it's going to be in real time, step by step, nice and slow, so that you can see exactly how I make the cables and so that I can show you some of the mistakes that I've made so that you don't have to make the exact same mistakes. And if you're interested in getting any of the tools or parts that I've used in this video, I've left some Amazon links in the description below. That's a great way to support the channel if you do decide to use the same parts as me. And before we get started, something exciting that I want to announce is I'm finally launching my own sample pack. It's going to be called the Drums Volume 1. It's going to be solely focused on drums and percussions and some weird sounds as well that I use as percussions. I've created this drum kit entirely from scratch myself. There are no recycle sounds, everything from real instruments to some of the analog synths that I use. I've processed the sounds through Rupert Neve Designs gear, Better Maker gear, and something cool that I'm doing with the sample packs that I haven't seen other people do is I'm going to have a standard edition that's going to be at a sample rate of 44.1. And then I'm going to have a high-res edition with files at 96, 88.1, 48, and 44.1 for anyone who's interested in having high-res files for themselves if they do work in any of those sample rates in their productions. So I left a link in the description below where you can sign up for the pre-launch mailing list. And when that drops, hopefully sometime this month, the first 50 customers will get 50% off, so keep an eye out on that. All right, let's get back into making some of these cables. So for the parts of the actual cable, I use a Mogami 2534 quad microphone cable, a Mogami Gold female connector and a male connector, and some lead-free solder to bring it all together. Then for the tools, I use a vise just to hold the cables and everything else in place, a soldering iron, a sponge to clean the actual iron, an air extractor to clear some of the fumes, gloves just to protect my hands, wire stripping tools, wire cutting tools, a soldering mat to protect the surface because I don't have a garage to work in and I got to work on my dining table here, and a cable tester to make sure that you did everything the right way and that you didn't miswire something the wrong way. As I mentioned before, all of these parts and tools are linked in the description below if you're interested in getting the exact setup that I have here today. And the steps to making a cable are actually pretty simple. I think it just takes some practice, but the steps really are you measure out the length of the cable. It can be 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 10 foot, whatever you want. You're making it yourself, so it can be a custom length. So you measure it out, you cut it, you put the boot from the Neutral connectors on before proceeding with any other step. This is super important because if you forget to do this now, it's going to be a pain in the butt to figure out how to get the boot after you've soldered some of the cables together. So make sure you do this and do not forget the step. Like take a sticky note and put it on the desk and just make sure you don't forget the step. It's super important. But after that, we're going to strip the wire, prep the Neutral connectors with some solder the wire to the connector, screw it all together, and then test the cable to make sure that everything's working correctly. One thing to note is right after you're done soldering the cable, you screw everything together. Some of those parts are plastic, so just make sure you let it cool for 1 to 2 minutes before you screw on the plastic to some of the metal parts there because plastic and heat don't really go well together. All right, let's go to the living room and make some cables. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is just measure the cable. So I'm just building one cable here that I'm gonna use from a microphone. So to be honest, usually if I'm doing like two cables that are gonna be the same, like coming out of a compressor going into the patch cable, I would do it the same length. But if I'm just making one cable and it doesn't really matter, I'm just gonna kind of eyeball the measurement here. All right, so that's a good length. So I'm gonna cut it right here with this trusty wire cutter that I use for my bonsai trees as well. All right, so now that that's cut, we're gonna find our wire stripping tool. So this is one of the ones that I use. What you're gonna do is you're gonna cut about an inch of just this black part right here. Don't cut too deep because then you're gonna damage everything. So I'm gonna go like an inch. You can kind of eyeball this. You don't need to be too specific. And there's other tools that make this easier, so do whatever is good for you. So there we go. So now that we've exposed that, this is the ground. Those two are gonna be your hot and your cold. What you're gonna do with the copper for the ground is you're gonna kind of spread it around, fan it out, like that. Just be careful because these wires are a bit delicate. Here, that probably should go around that way. When you do this in person, you'll kind of see. To be honest, you'll have to mess up about 5 cables, because that's what happened to me before you get a good one. So that's the way, just the way it works. All right, and then you want to twist this ground cable like that. We're going to put some solder on it later, but for now, just twist it, check it, make sure nothing's broken. Then you're going to take, there's going to be 4 wires in here. There's going to be 2 hot wires and 2 cold wires. You're going to go like this and you're going to spread them out. And in the middle, there's going to be this kind of plastic tube. That's just for additional rigidity. So you're going to take a different wire cutter and you're just going to cut that out like that. We don't need that part. All right. And then for these, I have a different wire stripping tool. The way that this works is you find your size right there, and then it strips it for you. Makes it nice and easy. And this is a 20 gauge wire. You can see the 20 right there. So that's the setting that you're going to use. So that's 1. Make sure you get in the right part of the teeth. And don't cut into the cable. That's 2. That's 3. And that's 4 right there. You can see some of these are a little long. The rubber part is just a little longer than I want. So I'm just going to go in and one more time, make sure I cut off any excess kind of plastic tubing. That seems kind of good to me. Just fix this one right here. All right, and don't worry if this is too long. It's actually better to have them a little too long than too short, because when we solder these together, you can simply just trim away the parts that you don't need. Okay, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the hot wire and twist it around with this hot wire, and the cold or the blue wire and twist it around with the other cold one. Simply just fan these out again. And twist them. Get these out of the way. Twist them together. And then same with these. Just fan them out. And then twist them together. All right, that's it. So that's this side. Let's do the same on the other. So we're gonna take these ones, take about an inch like that. Cut around, take off black tubing carefully without cutting into the ground wire. All right, put these away. We're gonna fan out the ground wire. Twist it around to make it nice and tight. All right. If you see any little strands kind of coming out, just twist them and put them in place. And we're going to fan the cold and the hot wires again. Then this plastic tubing in here, just going to cut that off. All right, and we're gonna spread these out again. All right, grab our wire stripper, the 20 gauge size. All right, those are good. 2 more. All right, and then last one that we need to strip. Maybe this way is better. You want to try to remove kind of as much of this plastic tubing as possible so it's not too long. All right, that's still a little too long. All right, that's probably good. So again, we're gonna do cold to cold and hot to hot. Usually the colds are blue and the hots are clear or red, depending on the cable that you have. Then you twist these together. You know what, this is still a little too long. Cut some away. See, this is why I do this in real time, so you guys can see some of the things that I run into, because these are some of the things that you'll probably run into. All right, seems like a better size now. So fan these out. And twist them together. All right, so now we have this side prepped and the other side prepped. And see, I already ran into an issue. And this is exactly what I actually told you guys to do, and I didn't listen to my own advice. You put the boot from the Neutra connectors on before proceeding with any other step. This is super important. This is super important. So we put this together, but we didn't put the boot. So if you run into this issue, don't try to put on the boot of these connectors while the wires are in this state. You want to actually solder them first, get them nice and tight, make sure that all the strands are soldered together, and then you put the boot on. So that's what you do in case you forget, which is what happened today. So we're going to turn on our solder. For this particular solder, I put about 700 Fahrenheit. So if that's what you need to do for your solder, just read the packaging on what's required for different types of solder. I use this specific lead-free solder, so for this one I use about 700 Fahrenheit as the temperature. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually move this closer. We're gonna tighten this. All right, so the solder's heated up. What you wanna do is you wanna, actually, let's turn on our fume extractor. Make sure that we're not breathing any of this in. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna actually touch the tip of the soldering iron to the solder to get some solder on the actual tip of the iron. This will help with heat conductivity. And then when you do that, you simply just kind of solder it on like this by touching it and kind of spreading it around. It's kind of hard to explain. You kind of have to do it a couple of times to get a feel for it, but don't worry if you mess up a first couple of times. You know, I think I went through 5 or 6 cables before I actually managed to do a good job with soldering. All right, let's turn on the extractor and solder this together. And you want to make sure you get both sides. All right, and then the ground. Don't hold the solder to the wires for too long, because then it's going to overheat and cause some of this plastic to melt, which is no good. If you get too much solder on any part, you can just go like this and spread it out. And then you wipe your solder on the sponge just to get rid of the excess. Okay, that seems pretty good. I might just fix up the ground a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Could be a better job, but it'll do for today. All right, we're just gonna let that cool for a second. While that cools, we're actually gonna open up the first. So this is the female. I'm gonna take out the parts. You can see here, you have the kind of connection holder. This is the boot that I was talking about. So this is what I forgot to put on that we'll put on right now. And this is the actual connector that's gonna go on at the end. So I think this is cooled enough. You can now put on the boot. So what you're gonna do, just bring these together. And you're gonna slide on the boot. This is not the right way to do this. Like I said before in the video, you wanna do this before you strip the cables, But if you have to do this because you forgot, simply just solder these and they'll stay intact. See, right there, the boot is on. All right, we're gonna put this away. Now we're gonna grab one of the connectors. You want to put it there. You want to put it on the vise so that these kind of pockets are sitting up. All right. And what we're going to do, we're just going to put a bit of solder into each of these. So you're just going to go like this. Take your soldering iron. That. And what this is doing is it's prepping the connector so that when we add our wire, there's already solder in here and it's just gonna glue together. So we're just gonna leave that for a second. So if we take this out, we can see the numbers. So you have 1, maybe I'll flip it. You have 1, you have 3, and you have 2 right there. So what you want to do is you want to kind of angle everything in the way that it's gonna flow. So like this, and then the ground right there. We can see that these are quite long, so we're actually gonna cut some of these. So I'm gonna cut this probably like that. Yep, we're gonna cut this quite a bit as well. All right, and then we're also gonna cut the round. All right, so let's start with the cold. So I'm gonna put some solder on the tip. I'm gonna hold this to the side of this bucket, not directly on it, and then let it melt like that. Let it cool. Then we're gonna do the same thing to the hot. It's still a little too long, so we're gonna trim it a little bit as well. It's better. So we're gonna go like this. We're gonna hold it down, and we're gonna hold the solder from the side. Yeah, and then let go. And then for the ground, same thing. This ground I soldered a little too thick, but that's okay. Just gonna hold it. There we go. The ground wire wasn't cooperating there for a while, but now we got it in. All right, so that's one wire done. You have your hot going to 2, you have your cold going to number 3, and you have your ground going to number 1. All of these are labeled on the actual connector. The text might just be a little small to see on camera. And we're gonna let this cool just for a second. And what you're gonna do is bring this boot up like this. You're gonna take this part, which essentially just crimps the cable and makes sure that everything's being held in place. There's only one way that this can go. In this case, it's this way. Like that. And then you put this on top. Again, there's only one way that it can go. You might need to just wiggle it around a little. There we go. So that slides in. You bring the boot in like this, and then you just twist these together. They also sell these boots where you have different colored, like this spinny thing at the end, if you want to differentiate your cables as well. But I just have the black version. So you put it together, and that's it. The female side is done. Let's do the male side. All right, we have the same situation again. Just gonna take our cable, like this. All right, and you want to work kind of quickly. You want to make sure that you're not holding the soldering iron too long on any of these parts, including the wire, because again, the heat travels down and starts to melt a lot of the plastic. All right, so let's start the extractor and put some solder on this. Remember, solder on the ironing tip first, and then you put your solder down. All right, and then just make sure to go under. All right, let's do the cold connection. All right, and then let's do the hot connection. All right, clean your soldering iron. Let's take this out. Let's inspect. Might need to do a tiny bit of cleanup. And again, I'm not a soldering pro. I just kind of learned this on my own and thought I'd show you guys how I do it and make mistakes along the way, because no one's perfect and you guys might make the same mistakes as well. I can feel the wire heating up. So I've been doing this for a while now, trying to fix some of these spots. Okay, I think that's good. Turn off the extractor. So now we have our solder on here. I'm just gonna, let this cool for a second. Just put it in here. Let's take the male connector, open it up. And we have the same parts again. You have the actual connection point right here. You have the thing that holds the cable together. And then you have your boot and the main compartment right here that go together. Again, we forgot to put the boot on, which happens to everyone. So what we're gonna do, remember, solder these wires like that first, so they're nice and rigid. Then we're gonna take them and put the boot on backwards like this. Don't worry, the rubber on the boot is pretty flexible, so it's not gonna break on you. All right, so we have our boot. We're gonna put that away for a second. We're gonna take this connection. Remember to follow the same steps. Pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is hot, and pin 3 is cold. Hot is usually red or clear, cold is usually blue. So the numbers are pretty small on this, I'm trying to see. So 3 is the middle one, 2 is on the right, and 1 is on the left. Another way to remember this is if on the female side you have ground, cold, hot, on the male side you're gonna have the opposite. So the cold is gonna stay the same, but the ground is gonna go on the left side and the hot is gonna go on the right side. But the numbers are there on the connectors as well in case you forget. So we're gonna prep this connector again. And when I say prep, I mean put some solder in these pockets right here. Let's start our extractor. A bit of solder on the, oh, we gotta clean our iron, it's pretty dirty. So a bit of solder on the ironing tip. And then we're gonna put solder there, solder in there. Don't put too much, by the way, because you don't wanna be in a situation like that. Just gonna take some off. Because if you're in a situation where there's too much solder, then the solder can jump between the points, and that's no good. All right. So now we're gonna bring our cable and we're gonna trim it down again. So remember, cold in the middle, ground now is gonna be backwards. So it's actually cold in the middle, hot on the right, and ground on the left. So this is, again, you can see, way too long. We're gonna trim this. It's probably good. Trim this as well. But don't trim too much too quickly, because then you'll run into issues of not having enough and you'll have to redo the whole cable. All right, and then the ground. All right, the ground we'll figure out. So I like to actually start by soldering down. Sorry, I just realized this could probably use a tiny bit more solder. All right, that's good. Let's check the other connections. I think this could use those as well. All right. So let's start with the cold. We're going to orient it this way because, again, hot has to be on the right side this time. So put a bit of solder on the tip. And we're going to drop this in. This is not tight enough. It's moving around. All right, it's better. Let's try again. All right, so that's the cold. Let's see how the hot is gonna be. This might be a little awkward. Yeah, I didn't do the best job of cutting down this one, but that's okay. This is gonna be an interesting one. Oh man, that's not the best job, but hey, if it works for now. All right, and then the ground, it's a little too long. Let's get it down. The ground might be the trickiest because it's very thick. So sometimes it's hard to actually get it in place. Yeah. Now the wire's getting too hot, so I'm gonna rest it for a second. All right, so it's in a little bit, but I don't like how that's looking. I want to push it down a little more. All right, not the best job, not the worst job, so we're gonna just have to roll with this for this video. Okay, I'm gonna turn off the extractor. We can turn off the soldering iron because we're done with that. Put the solder away. All right, I'm gonna put this device a little further. So you're gonna take this tool, again, it only goes one way. In this case, it's this way. And again, sometimes you kind of have to move this around so it gets through. It's not too cooperative sometimes. Okay. Then again, this also goes in just one way. All right, that was a bit of a struggle, but I think we got it. Screw it in. Screw it in nice and tight, and there's the other side. So now you have your female side and your male side. So the last thing to do is to test it to make sure that we actually did this correctly and that everything works. Because if you didn't do it correctly, then you have to unscrew it all and see exactly what went wrong. So let's grab the cable tester. So this is the cable tester. Let's see, it has battery. Yeah, it does. Okay, so what you do in the cable tester is you plug in the male side to the female of the cable tester and the female to the male of the cable tester. And what the cable tester is going to say is pin 1 has to go to pin 1, but if it says pin 1 goes to pin 2 or pin 1 goes to pin 3, or if multiple LEDs light up, then you did something wrong. Because this is an XLR collection, there's only 3, 1, 2, 3. 4 and 5, that's if you're doing MIDI cables. So let's go. So the first one seems to be correct. Pin 1 is wired to pin 1. Pin 2 is wired to pin 2. And pin 3 is wired to pin 3. So in this case, everything works. Even though the soldering job was okay, we don't have any shorts, we don't have any issues with continuity, and everything is wired correctly. So this cable now is ready for use. So another variation of this cable is XLR to TRS. A lot of times you use these types of connections if let's say you have a compressor or a limiter that's hardware and you want to go from the output or the input of the compressor to maybe a patch bay. A lot of patch bays, either you have to solder it in or they're TRS connections. So in my case, if we look at the Better Maker mastering limiter, it has XLR outputs. I route these outputs from XLR to a TRS connections in the patch bay. And then from the patch bay, I do whatever I need to do to route it wherever I need to route it. But yeah, thought I'd mention that if you watch the TRS video that I've made, and then you watch this XLR video, you pretty much apply those exact same steps to making an XLR to TRS connection. The only thing you have to remember is on the XLR, pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is hot or red, and pin 3 is cold or blue. Every cable might have slightly different colors, but they should be somewhat the same. Instead of red, it might be like clear, but it should be about, the same kind of color scheme, especially if you use the exact same Mogami cable that I have. And on a TRS connection, if you look at that video, follow the exact same steps of where to solder the ground, the hot, and the cold, and then you should be good to go for an XLR to TRS cable. Same steps, just slightly different connections on the ends. I hope today's video was helpful in learning how to make your own XLR cables at home. I know it's much cheaper to do it yourself than to go to the store. You can also control how long you want the cables to be. You're not really stuck by the industry standards of what cable lengths are, so that's kind of nice. And also, if a cable ever breaks, you now know how to repair it all yourself. Don't forget, click the link below to sign up for the pre-launch of my sample pack. Again, the first 50 customers are going to get 50% off. It's a great way to support the channel, and you get to have some cool sounds to use in your productions. And if you made it to the end of the video, I'll post a link somewhere on the screen to the TRS cable making video that I made. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll catch you in the next one.